Hey everybody, Doug and Pat here with another episode of Wealthy Gym Owners. And today, Doug is going to do a dive into converting trials into clients or trials into members, whatever your nomenclature is. So, Doug, I think this is a pretty timely episode and maybe just as much a critical episode because, that's what drives us all. We got to get people through the door and then turn those people through the door into clients. So I'm excited to dig into this.
Yeah, I think we've seen, and you've certainly been a foundational part of that with the front end offer, right? Like getting people in your door often requires something like it's really challenging on the front end to sell directly into membership. We can talk about once we get them in the door, how we can skip the trial. We'll certainly unpack that. But on the front end marketing piece, we have to have that front end offer. And that's what we're talking about here, whether we call it a trial, a front end offer, where it's the example I always use is the test drive, right? For a car. Like, what is your version of the test drive? We can call it 100 different things, but it is paid or unpaid opportunities for people to try you out.
So, yeah, I think that I probably was at the front end of this whole concept of calling things a front end offer. I certainly wasn't at the front end of creating it. People were using day passes forever in gyms. People had open houses or house showings for homes and test drives for cars. But I think reverse engineering it and talking about how that should look for our industry was something I was passionate about. But I also think that so many people miss the mark. They're like, okay, the job's done. If I get them in the door, most of them buy, which in theory sounds right. And certainly the pendulum swings to your favor. But if you don't have a system in place for converting trials or front end offers, you're probably leaving half of the potential clients on the table. So, how do you think about this? How do you approach it in a real practical sense?
Yeah, so I think there's two different trials that we can have, right? So there's what I would consider to be like your evergreen that's typically free. We've talked about this with our coaching clients at length. Like, we don't need to be afraid of free. That doesn't devalue your service. That test drive, you can test drive a $100,000 car. That test drive is going to be free, right? There's a component that 365 days a year, if somebody walked in your door or went to your website, what would they see? That's what I would call an evergreen trial. Common examples we see of that would be like a 7-day pass, a 14-day reset, something like that. And then those are more kind of experiential trials, right? They're not promising a result. They're just allowing you to try it out. So the messaging and language is different as opposed to things like the 6-week challenge and the 4-week or 28-day kickstart, like all these things that are called different things. Those typically are they're typically deadline driven, right? So we may start them, and you probably would benefit from starting them as a cohort where everybody starts on a particular day. So there's a deadline to enroll in that trial. The other thing about those longer durations is they're typically paid, right? Once we get past the 30-day mark of a trial, maybe even for semi-private or small group, I would maybe even say like 21 days. Once you get past that duration, you probably want to get people to pay for it in some capacity. Less than that, we can certainly go back to the evergreen free stuff. But your deadline drivens are paid. And the other big thing that I think people miss the boat on in difference is the evergreen, going back to that for a second, does not promise a result. It's just allowing people to try you out. The deadline is you have to deliver a result in that time frame, right? People are buying the result, and the goal is, of course, to get them to get the result and convert. But very clear differentiator there that for example, your 28-day or your 50-day women's program or whatever you're going to offer, that has to have a result to it because people are signing up for the result versus the experience. So the short answer is you want to have both of those. And I think there's seasons of, for example, we're recording this in the new year. This is a great time where people are looking for a result. And so offering a paid, deadline-driven, longer duration trial may be a benefit as opposed to in the middle of summer when everybody just wants to be outside. you may be better spent just running an evergreen type trial.
Yeah, I think that there's just so much power in the experiential piece of this, right? I mean, if you're looking at like key milestones in a relationship, getting somebody through the door is one of those really meaningful milestones. And I'm glad that you talked about the free trial piece of this because people have different objections or perceived obstacles to come through the door. And so by kind of mixing offers that you have, then you can address all those. Some of them, it may be duration commitment. Some of them, it may be financial risk. So I think getting them through the door is a key milestone for that, moving them to this longer objective of becoming an actual long-term client.
For sure. One of our boardroom clients, Melanie and Jason Ash, the phenomenal clients, and they made me a sweatshirt a couple meetings ago that says the hardest part is just getting them in the door, right? And so I think as an industry, we spend a lot of time thinking about that, like just how do you get them in the door, which leads to my next point. Like, to be clear, I'm all for not needing to sell a trial, right? I think there's a fear that I'm not going to convert them to membership or I don't want to have to deal with the trial process. I think oftentimes, and it's not a bait and switch because you're still going to offer the trial as an alternative, but oftentimes people need the experience, the free experience or the trial to get them in the door. So let's say that we're alternating throughout our marketing calendar between those two different trials. And ultimately, with any of those, we're going to get them to raise their hand, right? And the biggest piece of advice I can give you in regards to kind of choreographing this experience is if we visually think of that as multiple different ways for people to come in the door, once they do walk through the door, the process should be very singular laned, meaning it's the same process. Whether I inquired for your 7-day pass or your 28-day reset or your 6-week challenge, I still inquired to join your program. And so what is your standard process for that? And so for most people, it's some type of success session or strategy session, kind of initial pull out the pain points from them, talk about their goals, and sell them into the program. And this is a great opportunity to unpack. We got this from Beth Bishop, who's out in California. She called it the Godfather offer. And I love the name of it, but it's really talking about this idea of when you meet with somebody, and let's say that they came in for any trial, regardless of what it is, you're going to talk about their goals, you're going to talk about their pain points, you're going to talk about their injuries, etc. And you're going to most likely find, hopefully mutually, that this is going to take longer than 14 days for them to get the result that they're looking for. And so you can present them the Godfather offer, which is the offer they can't refuse, which is a kind of one-time deal if they sign up that day. So you can bonus stack that with add-ons like in-body, nutrition consults, supplements. Just think what things would they maybe see a value that you can add on. And then typically it's a slight discount up to 50% of their first month of membership. So they're still getting the financial incentive. And so your script is, hey, I know you came in for a 14-day, but can we both agree that this is going to take longer than 14 days? Yes. Okay. If you sign up today, I'll give you boom and boom. And that gets them right onto membership. You don't have to worry about tracking them. And we find as a marker, we find about half the people will take that. And then again, it's not bait and switch because you're saying, hey, if you don't want to do that's fine. You can still do the 14-day trial. So it's a nice way to, let's say you meet with 10 people. Instead of having 10 trials to track, now you only have 5.
The fun thing for me is seeing how what is old is new again, right? And I remember the health club that I own, we did, when we went into the market, everybody was doing a single day pass. So we're like, we're going to give away a week. And then when people bumped it to 3 days, we went to 14. When people went to a week, we went to a month. And that was always the front end offer. It's like, get them in the door, free. Now, I think Beth's name was way cooler. I mean, we just had a fast action offer, and it was in a health club setting. It was gym bag, t-shirt, water bottle, gift card with discounts to all these local businesses. Probably tanning was in there somewhere at that point, right? and then a waived enrollment fee.
Mm.
And it was, hey, if you know this is the place for you, if you feel at home, if this is the right environment, then would love to give you this for getting on board today. And the reason I want to bring that up is you kind of just threw out like half the people take it. Our conversion rate on day one really always stayed between 56 and 59%, on average, probably closer to 58. Didn't matter if it was a 7-day trial or a 30-day trial. The people who walked through the door always converted at about that rate. And the logic was really simple. It's like, okay, if you're like, you got to have them in the room to even make that offer, right? And so much of the things that I think that we miss as business owners, the fact that if you're only judging me based on a Facebook ad or a social media post, it's kind of apples to apples, right? But if I get you in the door, that's when I can kind of differentiate myself. I got you past what probably is the toughest mental and emotional stumbling block for you. So when you make that offer, you're making an offer to somebody who's already gotten past probably the biggest objection they had.
So. For sure. So if we kind of take it to the next step and say, obviously, the half that go right onto membership, we're going to wow them, we're going to onboard them. But then we still need to make sure we have a plan in place for the other half that may not, whether it be due to you didn't remove enough risk or they're still hesitant, whatever. There's some objection there that we didn't overcome, and that's always going to be the case with a percentage of them. And so they end up doing this trial. The largest thing I can say with a trial is there needs to be a weekly cadence to it. So oftentimes when we first start with gyms and I ask them like, okay, you're getting in trials and then what's your trial? I'll say, what's your trial conversion percentage? And they don't know it. So we identify trial conversion percentage, which if you're looking for a marker for that, we like somewhere between 60 and 80% of trials. So out of that 5 that did a trial, about 60 to 80 of those are going to stick long-term. And so it's certainly worth it to continue to, I'm not going to say reduce, but soften the ebbs and flows of this business. You all of a sudden get 10 trials and then only 1 convert, and so you're back down. And then you get 5 more trials and then only 2 convert and you're back down. We want to have a real choreographed experience to convert those trials. And so the system that I teach is quite simple, which is just a weekly check-in with them and not waiting until the end of their trial. That's by and large the biggest thing I can tell you is if they signed up for a 28-day trial, don't wait until day 27 to have a conversation about sticking around, right? Because that's frankly when they're going to start to question it, when they're going to start to maybe tail off, when they're going to think about what else can I do or should I continue to do this? Versus like most of us attract a client that either hasn't been into a gym for a while or is intimidated by a typical gym. And so they experience your service that is usually for most training gyms quite different than what they've never, a lot of our clients have never been coached before. So that emotional kind of high, for lack of better terms, is very real in the first week or two. And so having that weekly check-in where you can shout out a win and then offer a scaled down version of a fast action offer each week, I think is a great way to make sure they stick with you long term.
So we've got people through the door. We've got weekly check-ins. Let's move ahead beyond that, and then we can kind of come back and maybe fill in the blanks. Like, okay, let's say I go through the trial and for whatever reason, I don't convert. I'm one of that 20 to 40%. What's the process look like then?
So if your trial, let's say you've done your weekly check-ins and they don't convert, obviously you're going to do one final reach out as their trial expires. And then I would make sure you have a list that is segmented on whatever CRM you use that is exclusively old trials, like Alumni, right? Because these people have already experienced what you do. And so the maybe hook or message to them is different than somebody that's never experienced. So oftentimes it could be reasons for not converting, aside from the just, I was not a good fit, which is maybe only going to be 10, 20%. It's typically either finances at the current time, or I think by and large, the biggest objection that people maybe underestimate in this industry is just fitting it into their schedule and their time, right? Like we talk about kids a lot. And so I'm getting to the age where my kids' age are all starting to do activities every day after school, right? And so every day after school, Megan and I are like, okay, you're going to take Caden to this and I'll take Ellie to this. I'll grab the twins with me. Like it's chaos. And so if I see an ad for your gym and you don't have a particular time slot, it may not be money. It may be, I may love it, but if you don't have the time slot that I need, I'm not going to join. And so in 2 years, that might change. In 6 months, that might change. Summer schedule versus fall schedule might be different. Kids out of school, kids in school. So I think making sure you have, I say all that to remember that sometimes people, like we very rarely in this industry deal with bad experiences. Like people had a poor customer service experience and that's the reason they didn't convert. A lot of times it's just not a good fit for them right now. And so if you can have them on the segmented list and have continual reach outs to them, continual touch points, continual invites to come back, you'll see a lot on the reactivation side.
Yeah, I kind of expected and hoped you'd go that direction with this because I think a lot of people make assumptions about, well, a lot of owners make assumptions that somebody doesn't like it or they can't afford it, they're a bad fit, when timing is the most common objection that I think that I've seen for the reasons you just alluded to. And I also think that when you kind of pull away from it and see that, you know, those people that are on that alumni list may come in and do 2 challenges a year or something like that later on. They may not be your ideal continuous recurring revenue client, but if they're adding $500 a year to your revenue, trying to fit it in because they're not in their kids' peak season or whatever else, I think that's a positive too that often gets overlooked.
For
So,
sure.
so you've got this, I think, very straightforward, very simple process for converting trials, the weekly touch points, the consistent asks or offers. Is there anything that we need to kind of backfill and talk through during this whole process?
Yeah, when you're doing the reach outs, one, I would not rely on automation to have the conversion, right? So I'm a very big fan of automation for like education when you're onboarding. So if you're trying to educate clients about certain topics or educate them about how to utilize your services. But as far as like the actual ask to convert, we want to make sure that's personal. And there's kind of 2 golden opportunities. Number one, low-hanging fruit is at the end of the session, right? At the end of the session, they just had a great, don't let that pass you, that they just had a great workout. They're feeling good. Pull them aside and just start to ask, what are your plans after this? That opportunity, I think, is often missed. And with your individual text reach outs, we know that text is the predominant communication platform nowadays. So I'm all for utilizing that, but it's a very simple acknowledge a win, right? So show them the result that they're getting. The result may not be something physical. It may be that they've increased a weight in an exercise. It may be that you notice that their form is improved, but make sure you call that out and then give them a very specific offer to convert. So I think this is very helpful for people that maybe are afraid to ask, or maybe there's a fear or nervousness there to ask them to convert. By having a very specific offer, for example, if you sign up today, I'll give you $100 off your first month. I don't think it's about the $100. I think it's more that it gives you a clear call to action to invite them to continue on. So in regards to the reach outs, that's probably what I would unpack there. The final thing I would say, and I spent a lot of time role playing this with our team, is you want to make sure that you're always speaking in a language to the clients that talks about the future and is assumptive that they're still here. So for example, you want to try to build rapport as quickly as possible. You want to paint the picture that, hey, in a couple months, I know right now you're doing this. In a couple months, I envision you'll be here, even though they're on a 2-week trial. right? So you're already assuming that they're going to be here in a couple months. Connecting them with clients that are kind of 1 degree away is another tactic. So, for example, if you're running small group and there's a client in that session that's been with you for 3 months, right? That might be the perfect introduction because that client is not the 10-year veteran that knows everybody and is super confident. They're like just 1 degree away from the client that just joined. And so they can have a little small talk. And now you have some social proof, some rapport building there. So those would be some final nuggets, I think, to increase your trap conversion.
Well, I love this because I think that the great thing that kind of rattles around in the back of my head on this is we already kind of acknowledge if we get them through the door, good things tend to happen. I think so many of the people that we connect with say that. Doesn't matter if it's paid or free or whatever else, but by creating a system on this, you don't really have to do a lot more to dramatically increase the ROI on every person that comes through the door. So, you're not having to do a whole lot more work. You're getting to do the things that can kind of happen within your four walls. You're not having to go out and double your ad spend or deploy 4 more marketing strategies. And you could potentially increase the number of people who actually convert into long-term clients by 25, 50, 75, maybe even 100%. And that's a game changer for businesses just by integrating this into what they do. So, hopefully you guys that are watching or listening understand the power of this, understand how this is just one of those incredible levers that can be a big difference maker for you if you want to generate more long-term clients, more revenue, more profit. So with that, it's Doug and Pat with another episode of the Wealthy Gym Owners.